One day I was sitting eating conte and I was like, I need something with this. And a friend of mine came back and she'd been in Paris and she brought me a bottle of this. And I was like, well, why would I want to drink Chardonnay with this beautiful cheese? And, like really, really stupid.
Welcome everyone, thanks for coming tonight. We'll start around, just go with a quick introduction. So we'll start with you, David.
Absolutely. I own a little tiny wine bar called The Remedy. Been sort of doing this for a little while now. Clearly, as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm not originally from the country, but been here a long time. And the wines of the Jura, gosh, I mean, it's an honor to be a part of this podcast. It's one of my big passions in life, that region, the wines, the people. Been there many times, and it's just a really special region, and I'm sure we'll get into all those reasons why, but thanks for having me.
I'm Alessio Guidi. I've been informed that I should be using my nom de plume, or a self-styled wine scumbag. I'm a wine lover first and foremost, drinker, and I work for. I represent several wineries from Italy, Europe, Japan, Russia. My company is owned by Avignonesi in Tuscany. But, Jura is a great passion of mine, as, easy to say. But it's one of those regions that really get into you and you dream them at night. And you wake up in the morning and, you still want to learn more and you want to drink more. And every time there's a Jura tasting, that's, a very cool moment.
Heidi.
Hi, I'm Heidi and I buy wine for a restaurant group called Ottolenghi. And I've been buying wines for them for about 7 years now. And originally I grew up in Denmark and I came to London in sort of the mid-90s, and I wasn't really that into wine. The first few times I drank wine I had a really bad reaction and so I kind of left wine for a while, but this was sort of in the mid-90s where everyone was doing, everyone wanted to be a mixologist, it was called, and there was this amazing guy, Dick Bratzel, who was the king of Soho and cocktails. So I went to train as a cocktail bartender and was always really into mixing flavors and spirits. And it wasn't until maybe 10, 12 years ago I started I had a wine that sort of really moved me, and I kind of thought, okay, now I can start drinking wine. And and I'm really happy and honored to be here like everyone else. Jura is for me, it's a mystical place, and I actually only went for the first time this year, but I hope to go back many times again.
Do you still remember the wine that was your wine?
It was actually, it was a Grüner Veltliner from Mainklang. So it was just really different to anything I'd had before. So I'd worked in restaurants for many years, and I'd had training on Spanish wines, but none of the wines really moved me. I understood them, and I could taste them, and I could match them with the food in the restaurants, but somehow I couldn't connect with them, and it wasn't until I had this wine, and I just thought, okay, this is something different, and it felt like it was, maybe it was because it felt to me it was more like food than wine. There was something nutritious in this wine that really connected with me, and so I thought I'd found my answer. So I thought if I just go out and buy all the organic wines out there, that's it. And then, I soon realized just because it says organic doesn't mean it's good. So yeah, but that's how my whole interest in wine began.
And Doug, welcome.
Hello, thank you. Yes, I'm Doug. I work for a company called Le Cave de Purène. We specialize in organic, biodynamic and natural wines. We have over 2,000 wines on our list now, which makes it quite difficult.
Name them all now.
Yes, I know. I'm responsible for trying to reduce the stock personally. I talk about wine epiphanies, but I was born in the States and I came over here, and basically my introduction to wine was my dad, who would buy wine from Augustus Barnett in odd bins in the 70s, when you could buy like a Petrus for like £6, and I didn't really care. But because I preferred the taste of lemon peel soaked in vermouth. That was my first introduction to booze, and having a literal sort of thimbleful of cider and giggling for about 3 days afterwards. But I was young, so that was fair enough. And at some point, I gravitated towards our family restaurant in South Kensington, and I was given, God knows what they were thinking, the custody of the wine list, which had won Best London Wine List award for the Egon Ronai, and I had that little responsibility to try to sort of like maintain that quality. Well, anyway, so funny enough, I managed to win the award next year, and then I moved somewhere else and won the award again. So it was more by luck than judgment. I was just quite good at sort of writing tasting notes, and I was quite sort of personable in terms of the way I sold wine, because I had no knowledge really. So in all innocence, I was quite good at communicating. Then I worked as a sommelier for a few years, and I was really lucky to work in a restaurant which had a fabulous wine list of nearly 1,000 bins, and basically I tried every classic great wine, probably made between the 1950s to the sort of like late 1990s, from Margaux to Cheval Blanc. So, as a sommelier, you have a special privilege. I never nicked any wine, without telling the customers that I was going to do it first. So I had a lot of wine epiphanies, but I think my first wine epiphany, my greatest wine epiphany, and it still was a Bordeaux epiphany. And like, go shoot me for saying that, because now I don't touch the stuff if I can possibly help it. And it was in the Outer Hebrides, and I can't remember the year, but I think it was the late 80s, and we ate in a restaurant on a little hotel on this island in the Isle of Harris, and we couldn't drink the whole bottle because my mother was driving back. We got out of the car, we lived on a little cottage by the sea, and we started to drink from the bottle. And at that point, there was a full Milky Way, but there's also shooting stars and the sound of the sea and the mountains in the background. And it was just a cosmic event. I'm not sure the wine was any good, but it was a fairly cosmic event. And I thought, I really, I would love to remember what I'm drinking now. And of course, I completely forgot, as you do. And then 15 years later, I went back to the island, and funnily enough, I met the guy who sold me the wine. And I said, I don't suppose in a million years you could possibly remember what it was you sold. He said, yeah, it was Chateau Tourbeau, 1978. I thought, you've got an amazing memory. Surely enough wine has flowed under the bridge to be able to forget that event. Anyway, so now when I think of Chateau Tourbeau 78, I think of shooting stars, epiphanies, and I can describe you exactly the way it tastes, and I can't describe what I had 5 minutes ago.
That's a powerful epiphany. I think my favorite thing, I've never heard someone describe their wine epiphany as a cosmic event.
Yes.
But
the cosmos was in tune with what I was experiencing, I think.
No, fantastic. So everyone brought a bottle of wine tonight. We'll start with Doug. Doug, tell us what you brought and why you brought it.
So I brought a Poulsard, sometimes called Plusard, if you're a wine nerd or you're from Jura. And the reason why I brought it is because I really like the grape. It's a bit of an ornery, sort of difficult grape, but to me it's synonymous with Jura because it is a native grape. Poulsard and Sauvignon sort of seem to go hand in hand. They also tend to grow on the same sort of soils, which are sort of grey marls or red marls, so often they're co-planted. To me, everyone will have brought a fantastic white wine, and I just want something which is very, very drinkable. And the essence of Jura red wines is their freshness, their lightness, and their drinkability. That's the reason why I brought the grape variety. Then I brought the grower, Jean-François Ganevin, also called Fan Fan to his friends and enemies alike, I'm sure, and to his fans, and to his fans even. And yes, I can riff on that for a long time, and maybe I shouldn't. Anyway, so he's in the south of Jura, not in a little hamlet called Rotalier, and it's not really an area where a lot of people work, so he's pretty sort of unique. When he first started making wines many years ago, the company I work for received big allocations of his wines, and he basically did his sort of like his work experience in Burgundy and wanted to make sort of quite Burgundian style wines. And his whites are quite Burgundian, and his reds were sort of Burgundian in the wrong sense of the word, because to me Jura has a very sort of unique the wines have a very unique feel, and I want the wines to really reflect where they come from and reflect the culture and reflect the sort of food. But he was making sort of Burgundian reds, new oak, cold maceration, really dark, intense, almost chocolatey wines. And we received huge allocations of these things, and of course we couldn't sell them. Now we really love the wines, and we get minute allocations of everything. Yep, that's irony for you. Anyway, so he certainly changed his style of winemaking, I guess about 7 or 8 years ago. He started pursuing a more natural path. He started to identify terroir and which were good vineyards. But Pulsar is definitely the one he makes least of. I mean, just literally 2 barrels. And funny enough, I say funny enough, that's not funny at all, really. And I think in the 2016 vintage, one of the barrels exploded. So there's like 1 barrel. So allocations were halved, and the allocations were already tiny. So everyone was on their knees begging for nothing, really. But each year that went by, his wines became more and more minimalist. And to me, I love a wine which has almost nothing, to play with. It's just a line of fruit or minerality. It's lean, it's pure, it's fresh. There's no fat on it. It's absolutely light and bright and crisp and clean. This wine I chose in the 2014 vintage, which was quite a difficult vintage. So ripeness was difficult, and yet it achieved its full ripeness at 10%. And 10% in an era of global warming and full ripeness, to me, is admirable. And it made us think that actually, if we were to plant a grape variety in the UK, we would plant Pulsar because it would be ripe at 8%, and it didn't have to have any color. And Pulsar has no color at all, so it looks a bit like rosé in the glass. And the difference between a Pulsar rosé and a Pulsar red is indistinguishable almost. So really, really pale, really pure. And of course, it doesn't take new oak at all. So it's all about big old barrels, foudre, and they're just there to caress the wine and caress the red fruit. And the fruit is red fruit, and I love red fruit. I love it on Pinot Noir. I love it on Pulsar and Trousseau. I love elegance and freshness and brightness and beauty and transparency, and this wine has all of those. And to me, it shows how Ganevin has come along. Really, he's had a sort of journey himself, a bit of an epiphany in terms of winemaking. And his reds have become more and more minimalist, which I think is true in the way that Jura reds should be drunk today, or literally, or tomorrow, and they're always of the vintage ahead. And the whites are much more considerable. They're much more structured. They have longer élevage, more time in the lees, and they can be aged for 10, 15, 20, 30 plus years. But sometimes we have to drink wine now. We can't really wait that long.
It's the same way they drink it in the Jura too.
Yeah.
I mean, they actually start always with reds, and then they have whites.
Great segue to get the wine in the glass.
So if you notice the color, it's amazing. It's so light. And sometimes we're looking for density of color, but actually what I like to do is to look, and actually if you hold it up, it seems to be almost like browning or orangey brown, but it really holds. It's really attractive the way it holds the light, and I always think that's a sign of a really healthy wine. But that is the classic Pulsar color when you hold it up. And as I say, it looks a bit like a slightly sort of muddy coloured rosé, and then. On the nose, I'm a real sucker for sort of red fruits and a slight earthiness in terms of the aromatics. It's not a complex spectrum, and although it's only 10%, but I still feel that it fills out the mouth with interesting, subtle flavors. But Pulsar has always been this sort of like, although it's the most grown red grape in Jura, so precedes Pinot and Trousseau. It's the one that you don't see very often on wine lists in this country, because I think people find it very difficult to understand. They're saying, where's the wine gone? Where's the color? Can I have some more color, some more extraction, some more, like richness, and you're looking for something that isn't there and has never been there. So just leave it to be what it is.
But in fact, you have bags of flavor, even though, as you say, it's only 10%.
It's just, I think they've got, there is this, this thing that among consumers is that the more color, the more complexity, the more quality, the more everything. But it's actually, for me, the other way around. You get more complexity, also in great varieties that at first look, you wouldn't give a chance. So, Pulsar, I mean, it's finicky, as you said, Doug, and you've got a lot of, it's the most difficult grape to grow in Jura. But when it comes out right, I mean, the bags of flavors, they're not intense, they're just chiseled, detailed, and, you have to go look for them, they don't scream. And that's, I think, one of the big plus of Pulsar, it shot.
I think it's one of the most ethereal grapes too of the Jura. To me, it's one of the most ethereal grapes actually I know. Full stop. It just has that essence about it that, as you say, it's kind of come hither. It's like you can't quite find it. You're looking, you're searching, and then it leaps out at you for a second, and then it's gone. And it's that kind of
it's just got
tease.
this wonderful subtlety to it. I mean, this understatement, this whisper, I guess, of elegance. It's not, as you say, it doesn't scream at you. And as you kind of alluded to, with some of the great whites of Jura, they can be really quite, exuberant, let's say. And this has a definite nice contrast, but in a befitting way as well. I mean, my favorite wines from Jura tend to be these ethereal, hard to define wines, and there's many different personalities of that, and this is kind of another expression that way. But the color's amazing. I mean, it looks like a 40-year-old Burgundy or Barolo or something like that.
I find this lovely mouthfeel. It's quite embracing as well in the mouth. It's not usually, you find, depending on where you grow. I mean, the Sud de Vermont, where Garibald is, tends to be a bit warmer, lower elevation, so you get a little more, roundness around the edges. But I think it works perfect in the context of the wine.
I think you get the line of acid. I mean, what Poussin has is acid. What Trousseau, it's like other grape is more about tannin and color and structure. It's a bit like Barbera and Dolcetto. They're sort of opposites. And you look at it, you see it's very shiny, that's always a sign of elevated acidity, which I love it because it's thirst quenching, just naturally. I think it's quite easy to pair with food because the acidity cuts through sort of like porky things and sort of like, slow cooked dishes. So the other thing to note, I guess, is, it's I suppose a more modern style of winemaking, the sort of carbonic maceration, or semi-carbonic, I guess, in this case, using whole bunches, and that lovely stemmy, edgy freshness that gives a line going through the wine, which I think is really appealing. And I think once upon a time, Ganneval would not have been doing this. He would have been macerating the grapes. There's no pump overs, no punch downs or pump overs. And I think, again, this is a more, I would say it should be a traditional way of winemaking. I think it's a more modern approach, a more subtle approach to just leave the wine be. Let it cook in its own time, no sulfur added, nothing, no filtration, and it becomes harmonious, I think, that much more quickly because it's treated really gently. This is a 60-year-old vineyard. As Licia says, I mean, he's not particularly high up, although actually, funny enough, some of his Chardonnay vineyards are amongst the highest in Jura at 400 meters. So, you have a reasonable elevation in Jura. It's pretty well 300 and above, which I suppose is pretty similar to Burgundy. Yes, I think the soils in Jura are pretty unique, whereas obviously in Burgundy you have limestone and clay. In Jura you have this collision between Burgundy and the subalpine soils. So you have a mosaic of different soils, and where Ganneval comes into his own in his completely crazy way is to make 45 to 50 different cuvées because he vinifies by plot, by different soil types. So it's Chardonnay or Savagnin or even Pinot Noir, per plot. Now, the vast majority of what he does is white, so it's nice to be reminded that those reds are absolutely delicious. But to me, he's quite Burgundian in the style of winemaking because he really, really wants to bring out terroir, and ultimately that's what we're looking for is something which is really expressive. And his wines are totally delineated. You can tell the difference between each cuvée if you lined them all up blind. you'd say, yes, that's Grus, that's Florine, that's Grand Tep, that's Chalasse, and it just shows you red marls, blue marls, grey marls, whatever it is, limestone. They all have this very strong inflection, or influence on the wine, and he really respects that. I mean, he would be crazy to make that many cuvées otherwise.
So Heidi, do you want to tell us about the wine you brought tonight?
Absolutely. So I brought a 100% Chardonnay from L'Octevin, Alice Beauvau. It's called Pamina. I tried this for the first time, I think, 9-10 years ago. I was working for, before I was at Ottolenghi, I was working for Whole Foods Market. I was doing all the cheese and wine stuff in the flagship store in Kensington. And I just started there, and I was still learning about wine and the whole pairing of cheese and wine. And I didn't know much. I only knew that Stilton really liked port, and it was all very basic what I knew. And then one day I was sitting eating Conte, and I was like, I need something with this. And a friend of mine came back, and she'd been in Paris, and she brought me a bottle of this, and I was like, well, why would I want to drink Chardonnay with this beautiful cheese? And, like really, really stupid. And then she's like, no, you got to try this, and so I did, and I was like, whoa, I found my perfect match. But I was super excited, but I was also really frustrated because I just found out that I was pregnant. So I was like, I have to give up all these raw cheeses, and I just found this wine that I just want to drink all the time. So, but yeah, and that's how I tasted Alice's wines the first time, and actually this year was the first time I went to visit her, and I'm trying to not be too dogmatic about wine and so-called natural wine and low intervention wine, whatever we want to call it. But I must say, standing in her vineyard and just seeing all the biodiversity and really, it sounds so cheesy, but really standing there and just listening to all the insects, and you could really smell all the herbs and all the fruit that was growing around. I just think it's something different, and it's not to say that that's the only way to grow and to make wine, but it made a really big impression on me, and it was sort of for me a really profound experience. I like all her wines, but this for me is really special. I think for me, sort of how my feel for the wines is that this is maybe the most serious out of the wines she does. And I love her. The first time I met her, you see this quite petite lady, but she's so strong, like it's unreal. And she's out there and just working in the vineyards every day, and she's so softly spoken, and there's just this real poetry about her, and I feel that you feel that in the wines as well. I should maybe have decanted that this can be a bit reductive, but for me, this is a wine that I have a real emotional connection with. And when you first asked us to bring our favorite wines, I was sort of thinking what represents the Jura the most. And, I was also thinking about Gannevan and Auvernois, but I was sort of sure that these guys were going to bring them. But for me, it was just more about, this is kind of what made me interested in the Jura. And this is a wine that I feel emotionally connected with, and I think wine is so much about that. It's that connection you have and the memories you have, and maybe sometimes it's not the best technically, so to speak, but I think that that's how I always feel about the wines. It's how you emotionally connect with the wine. To me, that's the best wine.
Absolutely. Sometimes you can't even explain why or shape why that. I mean, and sometimes it's not even a wine you like. Sometimes it can be a moment. One of my most memorable, one of my most memorable meals and my memorable wine moments was seared branzina with a bottle of Treviero della Sala, which I mean, you couldn't pay me to drink the wine now, but I was, with the context in that moment and the way it kind of encapsulated it was something special. But no, I think that's one of the most magical things about wines, and sometimes you don't know or you're not thinking of it, whether you're having a cosmic experience beneath a shimmering Milky Way, or if it's, you're caught blindsided by the first time you're having, a despicable Chardonnay with some Comte. It just, I think that's one of the things that got me into wine.
But I think what Heidi says about being in the vineyard is really important, because the whole point about wine is a connection to place and to people, of course. But to be to remember when you're smelling the wine, to remember the vineyard and the smells, all those natural smells. This is why I think these biodiverse vineyards are really magical places, and I think they can in the wine that magic can be released, and that's why we're drinking is to evoke that sensation or to bring us to a particular place at a particular time.
Yeah, when you're in a vineyard that's so full of life, I mean it's especially partly in contrast to the vineyards that don't have that energy, that don't have that care. I mean, there's something really captivating.
I think especially in a place like the Jura, where Heidi alluded to it earlier. I mean, the whole region has this sense of mystery. You said mystical, and it's true. And especially then when you take that and go into the vineyards, and then you have this connection with that type of wine and like that kind of, it can be a reverence.
Yeah.
And it's also very artisan. The cellars are really tiny, so it's not like you go from a beautiful vineyard into a vast, sort of stainless steel encrusted cellar. I mean, it's all very intimate, very familial, very traditional. It's like definitely got its sort of feet in the past, and very different. It's like Jura really seems to be detached from pretty well everywhere else in France and elsewhere in terms of its
it's
its
funny,
feel.
You talk to your French friends who are obviously not from the Jura, and they're like, oh yeah, that's that strange place that makes yellow wine. They don't even know what it is. Or there's maybe a chef from there. Okay, some nice cheeses, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's this unknown sort of thing.
That's exactly. I mean, when we're talking about, as you were saying, it doesn't have your experience, and in general, with Jura, it doesn't have to be perfect in terms of on the technical side, because Jura, as you said, is so detached from everything else that actually it's more the artisanal work rather than, again, big corporate wineries making, sort of industrial wines, or technical wines. So it's all about the origin, where it comes from. It's all about craftsmanship, in terms of it's not craftsmanship, work in the vineyard, and some of the wines might again not be perfect, but they always leave a mark. And perfect. Personally, I don't like the word perfect. I like imperfection because it's more interesting. And that's, I think, it gives you so much pleasure.
Don't you think it's a beautiful irony that Louis Pasteur?
Yeah, I was actually just going to mention that. We're talking about this technologically devoid place in the home of Louis Pasteur at the same time. Right? So it's that's a good kind of point back to the history of Jura. I mean, it's kind of commercial. It's in marketability, let's say, for so long, left it kind of as a void where people weren't going for commercial ambition. It was you were making wines in spite of commercial ambitions. It was, and I think that's kind of what's maybe insulated or protected the integrity, let's say, of the region's wines, because people were doing it to, as a dedication to the land, a dedication to their family's heritage, or a dedication to the region, in spite of commercial realities that maybe would have led them somewhere else.
I mean, how many places have a wine like Venjoux where you have to age it for 6 years and a bit, right, before you can release it? It's not the most commercially viable.
It's funny, a lot of the regions, from many countries, but let's talk about France, they were on hype at a certain point of history, and Jura was never. I mean, and that's funny. That's probably why it just stayed there, despite of the fact that Pasteur came from around the corner and changed the world in when it comes to his methods, but it actually never really worked. It was never reapplied there. It was never a big thing, and
you can't be a hero in your hometown. So I sell wine in London, not Saskatoon. So
apropos of not particularly anything, but I was looking at like a great map of Jura, and basically, I mean, Chardonnay is, we associate that with Burgundy, and the wines are sort of pretty well Burgundian style and sort of topped up and whatever, fine. But there used to be an incredible number of indigenous grape varieties, most of which have now completely died out. So what we see with Sauvignon Clusaz is really the sort of the tail end of a really artisan wine culture. I mean, that goes for all over the world, from Italy to France, throughout France and so on and so forth. But there are some really, really neat little grape varieties, and we see that Ganneval does one in which he has like 20 local grapes, but he cannot vinify them separately because there's like a few rows of vines. But he has done a cuvée which is just of like the old Jura grapes, Petit Besclan, Gros Besclan, Enfarinay, Isabelle, all this sort of Argent, whatever, and it had to be declassified to Vin de Table or Vin de France because the old grape varieties are not recognized anymore, in Jura, which I think is like, it's typical bureaucracy. Yeah. So I don't think France would ever have time for anything which is like authentic or indigenous.
I think one thing I also think is interesting about the Jura is, it's a very agricultural, agrarian region. And that's its heart. It's like, it's kind of thing. People talk about the breadbasket of France, because you have all these amazing food products that come from there. But yet it has this wine heritage. So I think that's a really interesting combination where you find these regions that are a little bit forgotten about, that are very agrarian and very, like kind of peasanty in a way, but then have this, interesting wine side. And that's one of the things that makes the Jura very special.
I think one of that kind of leads me to one of the things that I think about a lot with Jura that frustrates me a lot, and it's not nothing about the region. It's about this idea. I think because people who like us have discovered the region, it inspires so much passion, and I think that sometimes people who maybe aren't in wine or aren't as infatuated with the region or haven't had these epiphanies that we have, regard the wines as maybe being a bit esoteric, or that maybe that's perpetuated by the industry itself. But when you taste these wines, or whether you're tasting it with Comte in a restaurant, I mean, there's something just. You don't have to be a wine geek. You don't have to be all the way down the rabbit hole with these wines. They're just, objectively with blinders on, they're phenomenal wines. I mean, it's whether it's in a Sous-Vent style or which people who again maybe aren't as engaged with the Houillet wines or some of these. This is such an energetic wine. I mean, this is just really electrifyingly tense and captivating Chardonnay. And people who dismiss Jura as some sort of fringe or niche or too out there as a style are missing what I think is some of the most exciting stuff about it. Is there's the heritage, but just when you taste these wines, it doesn't matter what you like. I mean, if you are the most classical Burgundian entrepreneur buyer, you can't deny some of the pure class of these wines.
But I think you touch on the other really important side. I mean, we've talked a little bit about the history and the tradition and stuff and how that has such meaning in the wines and the connection. But actually, you also have this just amazingly exciting wine scene with young vignerons, people just working in a great way, working with each other, collaborative, creating these just, like amazing wines that you just want to drink, that are just, regardless of where they're from. And I think that's the other side of the Jura that's so exciting.
It is true that one key turning point, I think, in the Jura wine is very recent Jura history is, well, before the majority of the wines were made in a non-Houillet style, so not topped up, so massive personality on the nose, if you want to call it like that, so with the development of the floor and all that it entails in terms of aromatics, to like topped up styles with it now basically the bread and butter for everybody. And I think that is one of the key that has made Jura wines more accessible.
Do you think that that's in the same way, let's say, that the Michel Rolandification of emerging regions establishes the credibility of, say, let's say, Bulgarian Cabernet? You have someone like that comes in a very commercial, international style to say, look, we can make wines of quality in this defined parameter in these regions. Do you think that there's kind of a parallel with Houillet wines from a terroir expression, that, look, this is just in that they've established, or in a universal language, let's say, communicated the credibility or the validity of the terroir, or of the potential of through that style because it's more easy to understand?
I think it's easy to understand that. I mean, obviously, I'd like, to know your opinion about that. I mean, I think it's easier to understand the Nonouillet style because you don't have, the development on the floor and, all the aromas that you get out of Nonouillet style wines. They tend to overpower the rest of the wine. So especially, then it comes to the hand of the wine, of the vigneron, to kind of tame it all down. But it's easier because they're more readable, because it's what people are used to drink. And again, I'm not defending Nonouillet style rather than Nonouillet because I'm a big fan of both. And but as I said, I think it made the wines a bit more easier to understand. And but in that case, showcasing really other set of characteristics. So it could be, the terroir, the different kind of soils, different kind of climat that we find in Jura.
Funny enough, I think actually maybe you see like a bit of a switch in the Jura now, where people are moving away from the traditional way of making wine sous vide under floor, super long aging, and that stuff, to making this kind of fresher, topped up style. And maybe you're losing even perhaps a little bit of the tradition. I don't know what will happen in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, you could say the commercial success of VA wines is a threat to the. I mean, it's cash flow thing, right? It's like, are you going to make gin or are you going to make whiskey?
So at the end of the day, at Jura they might produce ZIL bottles, but I mean, the Nonouillet style will always appeal more to the super niche like us. In a way, whereas the other style will be could open up the sort of the audience and say, okay, that's what we do in Jura. Not only that, we also do that. And
but I think I disagree with that. I think that's one of the things with it. We assume. I think we falsely assume that that the sous vide style, this oxidative style, is too niche for people's palates. I think it's not true at all. My wife is a perfect example. She doesn't work in wine. She has a good palate. She has far better taste than I do in wines. But the first wine she ever called me to bring back from work, she said, that we had the night before was Domaine Le Chateau Chalon. She's like, you need to bring me another bottle of that. And she loves sous vide style. She loves, and I think if people love marzipan, or they love if whiskey drinkers or sherry lovers, obviously, I think there's just a wonderful appeal. It's not for everyone, but I do think you don't have to be professional to love this style. But how do you discover it?
That also touches on one of the great things of the Jura, which is food and wine pairing. And you have that aged Comté with a bit of Chateau Chalon or Vangune, and it's just like boom, like that the earth heavens open, and that's a great
the Nonouillet style nowadays it's a second step. So you get into that, and then you get into Nonouillet. I think, and again, I don't have the truth about it, just that I think the change from the Nonouillet style to the Huillet has put some focus on the Jura. Then for the new consumers that get into the Jura, the first step to then appreciate the Nonouillet, I think, is to go through the proper channel, which is stylistically. Then I'm not saying one is better than the other. Again,
but from the grower's point of view, it's a bit more probably complex than either or. So. Yeah, there's topped up, there's sous vide, and sous vide can be oxidative or semi-oxidative or barely oxidative. You can go Savagnin sous vide, or you can go Vangune. You can go partially topped up. It's like we saw there was a sherry tasting yesterday. Basically, every house or every grower, in the case of Jura, has their own method of making the wines. And I would say go further, I don't want to use the word cross-contamination to sound like an accident, but you taste topped-up wines and they are aged in voile casks. There's always a flavor of like that sort of yeasty umami sort of thing that's coming through. And you think that's definitely from the Jura because they're using Jura casks, and because then no one's using new barrels anymore, so they're switching around on the barrels, and there is like flavoring agents sort of like going back and forth. And I think that's really intriguing because I don't want it to be either or. I don't want to be dogmatic. Canavar is a classic example of like Mr. Top Up, but of course he makes at least 5, 6, 7, 8 now. Sous-Vide styles, or because he plays around. He does the 9-year. I was going to bring a bottle of that, but I couldn't find it. The 9-year topped up, yeah. Then there's the Prestige, which was his non-oxidative style, and then no, it was non-oxidative. Oh, I can't even remember Sous-Vide style. And then there's a Sauvignon Chardonnay, which is topped up, and one which isn't. So pretty well. I mean, when you're doing so many, the microvinification, and they make a load of cuvées, and we talked about Bonnard and Gannevat, and even Huillon, topped up, non-topped up style. Everyone is microvinified. There's a barrel for every eventuality, and probably every market and every palate. But I agree with you in the sense that obviously the route to market, a horrible word, is to go through some, let's say, the more approachable style, the more topped up style, because people recognise that. And even if it's just a touch different, a touch saltier, a touch umamier, no word, then of course it's only a short step to the next style and a short step to the next style. So that's the way to get Jura, working, I suppose, in a more.
Did you sell both styles at Ottolenghi, or?
No. At the moment, no. So at the moment, I think we only have the Rosé Martin, the Sauvignon.
Yes.
Yeah, it's amazing. I was thinking about bringing that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But for me, he's so underrated as a winemaker. His wines, for me, they have this ethereal dreaminess about them.
That's my first wine that I pour for Burgundy fanatics. They're like, I don't drink German. Taste this, and if you can't like it, get out. This wine's really pretty amazing.
I just think that it's so, it's like electric. It's just, the acidity is insane and just really, yeah. I was happy, sad kind of thing that it sold so well at Noppi, because the allocation was so small, so it was gone quite quickly, and it was a bit like, I want you to have it, but I don't really want you to have it. And,
so next time I come to Noppi, I have to ask because it's on the list. It's eaten.
It's really, it's hard, isn't it, sometimes when you do wine lists and there are things and you have maybe 6 or 12 bottles and you really want to sell it, but at the same time there's a part of you that's like, actually no.
I actually do hide wines in my shop.
I hide some wines
which
as well.
I'm sure some years from now I'll probably find some Ganneval or Rupert Leroy.
I think we all have the same secret guilt.
It's the Gollum effect, as I like to call it. The precious.
On a stylistic point of view, we might as well sort of cover the sort of more natural side of winemaking. But with the whites, particularly, if you look at Burgundy, there's a lot of fermenting in tanks, which is anaerobic, so you don't get an oxygen into the process, and then there's usually a sort of sulfur added at various points and whatever. And there may be new oak component as well, which gives you that sort of big, voluptuous mouthfeel. Well, in Jura, hardly anyone uses. I can't think of any of our producers who use a touch of new oak. That's the first thing. Everything is usually pretty, unless they can afford it. Everything is fermented in either cement or plastic, or usually old barrels. So there's a lot of oxygen that in play with the wine, and that sort of softens and mellows the wine out. And then they all go through natural malolactic fermentation, so you get this sort of buttery richness, breadth of fruit, but then you've got that acidity coming from the soils and whatever. So you've got that sort of also autumnal notes and spiciness from the leaves because the wines are unfiltered, and then you get this classic lemony acidity. It's really citric, which has always really surprises me. But whereas in Burgundy you get this disjunction between the sort of vanilla and then you get the sharp lemony sort of squeeze at the end, which I really don't like because it feels false. This is complete. The wine actually, because it's had oxygen, lees, mallow, and it's not filtered, it all comes together in a sort of warm mouthfeel and yet refreshing at the end. So.
No, and I think Heidi, electric is really, I think, the principal thing that I think of for my own notes in this. It's just it's so much energy and tension and precision as well. And I guess I'll maybe we'll talk about this more with Miroir as well. But it's really interesting. We'll be tasting 2 Chardonnays from Jura, both sans soufre as well, without sulfur. And I think people that maybe that don't taste as many wines, there's a lot of apprehension or nervousness about these kinds of wines, and there's it's going to be faulted. You taste this and you taste the Miroir. These are such precise tens. The antithesis of what every negative assumption that people have about the Sancerre wines with Chardonnay. I mean, it's.
I mean, if you gave this to you gave this to 99% of the people, they wouldn't think it's Chardonnay. No. It's something that's just magic.
So, Alessio, do you want to tell us about what wine you brought tonight?
Well, yeah, be very happy to.
I've been waiting
Well, you know,
for this.
that can back me up because obviously, it gets, his big allocations every year, that he keeps jealously in his own cellar. Here we're having the Mizuiro 2013 from Domaine de Miroir, which is very new. First vintage was 2010 or 11, if I'm correct. So it's a funny story, It's again, we're not going. That's not a traditional winery in terms of it's been established for 20, 30, 50 years in Jura. Is actually the owner is a Japanese guy called Kenjiro. And he started the winery after being he worked in a Japanese multinational years ago, and then he decided to give it up, as you do, and studied French first, then moved to France, and he worked in Alsace, Bruno Schuller, and then he got in touch with Geneva. He worked at Geneva. That helped him finding his 3-hectare plot in Cruz, which is not very far, always from Geneva, always in Sud-Revermont, and which, it all started, so he also makes several cuvées, not 35 so far, with 3 hectares, but, the Mizuiro is one of them. It comes from, actually a vineyard which is southwest position, again, about 300 meters elevation. And the guy, what they really, apart from being like a unicorn wine, which is, now I think unicorn is the word for what for Parquet was a cult wine. The word cult. Cult reminds you of Bordeaux, big wines. Unicorn wine is more like for the newer generation
of rarity.
Yes, it's a unicorn. It's somebody that I think out of nowhere, came down to Jura and with actually very little experience. It's not that he studied and then he did 10 harvests before starting his own thing. And he came out with this wine, which is absolutely minimalistic in the sense of winemaking, in terms of, is working, is working biodynamic in the vineyard, of course, but in terms of style, the purity, the chisel of that you find in these wines, they are, I think, not that common in Jura, even among, the really top producers. I find the details and the spikes of this wine, I like the word, the spikes, really don't.
Unicorn spikes.
Yeah, exactly. Then it's very difficult to get these wines, and I got so lucky to find actually some bottles on the internet in the wine shop in Paris, the Cave de Papy. I think we all know that. I was the good spot at the good time. So I found that they still had like some bottles, and they bought some. And after that, I didn't manage to get any more. So it's like, but then I got to taste it several times, and it was always like, chill in the spine, kind of sensation, which I think the Octavan is on the same sort of wavelength. I like to describe it. It's not particularly very pleasant image, but it gives you kind of an idea. It's like, your nails on a blackboard, kind of,
For the people who are not at our memorable Jura tasting at the Remedy, you, Derek. Yes, it was just you. Everybody else in this room was there.
That's why we're here today.
Everybody, yes, was sort of there. I think we had 16 bottles of various wonderfulness, but there was nothing quite like this. There was something about the way the wine evolved, which is quite remarkable. It was like a living wine in every sense, but I don't think I ever recall wine tasting that way, and I couldn't really put my finger on it other than saying it so reminded me of a sake. And I don't know whether it's associated with Kenjiro Kagami and being Japanese, but there was this like incredible quality in the mouth, and a moving quality and a sort of warmth of the wine and a umami, savory. I can't describe it, but it was definitely different, wasn't it, I think?
No, and there's actually an interesting vintage 2013, which was, very difficult and challenging, and
Like all vintages in Europe.
yeah. But I think 13, there was no mercy for the vigneron, and I think he managed to pull out a beauty. And again, especially when you say taste, it's got some sake reminiscent. On the nose, the first thing that strikes is exactly this sort of faded rose kind of, you get this, in a sake.
And again, another, as I said before, both of these sans soufre, both of these without sulfur, and just incredibly clean, tense, precise, elegant wines. I mean, there's just, there's quite a, in comparison, this one's obviously got quite a bit more power on the nose. The miroir for me, it's a bit more of this kind of, I always kind of refrain from going masculine, feminine kind of aromatic comparisons, but it has this savoriness, I guess, that in with that kind of
It's
that,
like
the floral character.
The Octavon, I think, is kind of a higher note, tighter pitched, and then this is kind of that more bass, deeper notes. More
and very wild. I mean, I'm getting like sort of wild herbs and whatever, and it's sort of almost like meaty sort of
It's
meat
meaty
stock.
for me, like the finish.
It's got this kind of like braised meat, these spices, this kind of.
It's very, 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 very complex, and again, it doesn't have obviously the depth, but that I would say more because of a vintage related issue. But in terms of complexity, this one is so much. It's so expressive, and it's got these umami notes in the mouth that is just they are astounding.
But it's super interesting that two wines that are same grape, same region, yet so profoundly different.
This is 13.
13, yeah.
And made by two very humble people who think and work in a very similar way.
Quietly profound. I mean, they're both have this
Like-
understated,
Like the people who make them.
when I had this amazing fanboy moment a year and a half ago when I got to meet Kenjiro, and I had no idea he was going to be there. I had no idea he was coming. It was just, hey, do you want to come taste these wines? And I said, yeah, sure. You had me at Jura. And then I walk up and you see this, 5'6", I don't know what that is in centimeters, but it's not many centimeters, walking up with this little case of, this with the miroir label on the side. I'm just like, oh my God, I'm about to taste not only like, it's one thing you're looking for these wines to just find a bottle to try, and then all of a sudden I get blindsided with the man himself and like his entire like portfolio, just quietly and walking up to this table, and I was just it was the most starstruck I think I've ever been with anyone, and then I got to taste them all. And there's just as you said, he's so humble, he's so soft-spoken and so timid almost, and there's this just subtle, profound, and quiet, profound experience you have when you taste these wines. It was really captivating, and he's thanking everyone for tasting his wine. You're like, I would literally shove people out of my way to taste these wines, and to have this was such a captivating experience. And then just after that, we had there was the Jura seminar with Wink, and
We pushed him in, yes.
yeah, and
Yes.
so then
Yes.
so it was a bunch of people. This was a lot of people's introduction to the wines of Jura, and then you have Kenjiro there, and it's like, this is Kenjiro's Poulsard, and they're talking about Poulsard. I'm like, this, and you want to stand up and kind of shout at everyone like, this is crazy that this is happening right now, that you get to be, that we're all experiencing this. And his Poulsard as well was just like ethereal. I mean, it just had this finesse, and it's interesting. I've tasted quite a few, and Labbe makes a very Julien Labbe makes a really nice Poulsard as well, and they could not be more opposite. And it's nice to see. Obviously, I have a preference for one style or the other, but just to see these indigenous grapes with these cult producers, and again with their own seeing their personalities reflected in these wines is it's really cool.
That's a really important point, actually. We thought this is the other element of terroir, isn't it? Is about the personality of the grower as reflected through their wine. So, although he's borrowed Ganavar's equipment and he's in the same blah 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 region, the wines are diametrically. I mean, you could never confuse them. They are so particular and wild and natural and purer than pure. It's not these are purer than pure, but in a different way, and it must be something to do. I do recognize something a bit of the Schuller in the wines in terms of the wildness. I mean, Schuller's just uncontrolled, but this is like a bit more harmonious in terms of its wildness. And I think the other important thing about all the wines we've tried so far is their indigenous yeast ferment. So they have that specific signature of the vineyards and the winery. So that's unique. That can never be replicated anywhere else. So these wines will always have that sort of identity. Then the other element of the artisanship in terms of most of these people, I mean, Ian Ganavar with his 40 blah cuvées, we're still talking about 10 hectares, and I'm sure the rest are, we're talking 3 hectares and very tiny vineyard. They must know intimately the vineyards, the way they work, sort of like, how high they're up, how much sun they're getting, when they're going to be harvesting, all these sort of things, and I suppose human beings are a bit like sort of computer or processors. They process that information and make the decision, but that's their decision. It's a very personal thing, and then they let the wine sort of flow, and they're sort of like they're just accompanying it on the way. That's what makes the wine sort of natural. Is the human element is to decide, we're going to harvest, and I'm going to use that barrel, or that part of the cellar, or that part of the cellar. Every single decision you make is going to influence the wine in a tiny little way, even if it's like I'm putting it into that barrel in that corner of the cellar, and that corner of the cellar is a micro degree centigrade cooler than that. We look at Ganavar's cellar, the temperatures are crazily different all throughout, whether you're in the bottom or the top of the cellar. All these things impact on the flavor of the wine. You could say that's the terroir of the cellar, the terroir of the human being, the terroir of the winery, and all those multiple indigenous yeasts, which you can only really get in a biodynamic vineyard where you have a really healthy population of quite strong yeasts competing against each other and in every vintage it will be different, that combination basically.
That's why we keep drinking.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
So Dave, do you want to tell us a bit about the wine you brought today?
Absolutely. So kind of segueing a little bit back to the traditional side of the Jura. This is, I think, it's fair to say, perhaps one of the very top producers of Vin Jaune, or in this case, Chateau Chalon, from the Jura, and this is Domaine Mackel. They are based in this amazingly pretty little village of Chateau Chalon, which sits up on this little perch of a cliff overlooking the vineyards of Chateau Chalon. And it's just one of those iconic little beautiful places in the Jura. Probably the most, certainly I think the most famous region, sub-region within the Jura as well. And they are probably the most famous producer of Chateau Chalon. Going back to Heidi's point about kind of the mystical, mysterious side of the Jura, a very quiet, secretive almost family that it's very hard to actually go and visit them. It's very hard to even try their wines sometimes. I mean, you see them perhaps more than Kinjira's wines, but to me they are really the epitome of the traditional oxidative side of Jura wines. So this is, of course, 100% Sauvignon, which it must be to be a Vin Jaune, or in this case, a Vin Jaune from Chateau Chalon, which is the most famous appellation for Vin Jaune in the Jura. And to me, this is really the epitome of the traditional oxidative side of winemaking in the Jura. But the bottle itself is called a Clavelin. It is 62 centiliters, which, as legend goes in the Jura, is the amount of wine that would actually evaporate when you have, starting with a 1 liter barrel of Vin Jaune, if you did such a thing, and you let it age for 6 years and about 2-3 months, which is what it must do to be a Vin Jaune or a Chateau Chalon. And it is that 380 or so milliliters, centiliters, whatever, of wine that would evaporate, and hence give you that much wine left. And it's an amazingly cool little bottle. I think even for some time in the U.S., you weren't actually officially allowed to import this wine, simply, bizarrely, stupidly, because it wasn't a regulated size. There was no such thing as 62.
Neil Rosenthal, I think I remember reading some story about this. I can't
Probably
remember.
chuck some in his suitcase and.
Yeah, I think there was some sort of smuggling in of clevelins of Van Jones to get it into the U.S.
And another thing that's I think all of us can agree on that's amazing about wine is when you have those moments where you try something that's like properly old, and yet maybe it only tastes like it's actually a fraction of how old it is. And I was lucky enough to try some very old Chateau Chalon in the Jura one time, and it's in a wine that can just age forever. Yes. Really, it's amazing. These are the wines that are designed to be drunk after 20, 30, 40 years or more. So this is one that is only a little baby in its youth at the moment.
We had that when I used to be at Hedonism, 1774 Van Jones from Arbois that came from one of the Percé de Vin auctions a few years ago.
Did you try it?
Yeah, it's a little out of my price range.
A little Corvette, no one's gonna notice.
Retailed it for 75,000 pounds a bottle or something.
Take on that much?
Yeah, it didn't come. It wasn't part of my bonus structure. It's crazy. I mean, just how timeless some of these wines are.
No, bonkers. And these are the wines that really are the epitome of the Jura, and to be paired with the food of the Jura. Amazing to drink on its own, but give me a 36 age month Comte with this any day. And
there's actually something you can drink as an aperitivo. I mean, I remember a glorious aperitivo with a great friend in Norway. We had aperitivo with the Van Jones from Ganeva, and side by side with the substance from Celos. Obviously, that goes off topic, but together, with it was amazing. I mean, it's just the best aperitivo you can go for. And actually, it's always so much drinkability, and there's always so much going on, but it's never heavy. I mean, they don't feel saturated by it, and
I think that's a sign of the great Souvlaki wines of this style is that density, that concentration and intensity, but also simultaneous almost weightlessness in terms of ethereal quality. And you can feel somewhere maybe they're a bit too squat. They sit on your palate too heavy, and they're quite gratuitous and still really nice to drink and really enjoyable and great pairings and great and all that stuff. But what I always find with Chateau Chalon from Macla is it just has this intense captivation when I taste it, but it also is really lifted and really ethereal, and I always find that really interesting. You compare it to, say, Poufinese, which is very cheesy and really heavy and kind of wild, or in comparison. And this is always.
Do we know how these wines are made? Because there's two ways of doing it. This one is not to top up, and the other one is to top up. So you can still top up a Souvlaki wine, and you get something. I'm sure Ganeva does, because his wines are so elegant. His Van Jones is more elegant than his other Souvlaki wines, which is odd, which is that, and this, it's like looking at the color, it's so light and ethereal, and it bears the 14%, absolutely beautifully. It's like lovely, sort of sinuous and fresh on the palate. So you would, unless you said about, make a great aperitif, I think, surprisingly not heavy at all.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you do find some really incredible Van Jones. I mean, obviously, Chateau Chalon is the most famous appellation for Van Jones, and they are the top of that. But you can find some amazing Van Jones outside of this little area down where Ganeva is, up where Auvernois is.
It's funny, Ganeva's Souvlaki wines have kind of started to become my favorite wines that he does, which is, I don't know if it's, I call it ironic, but it's interesting to me anyway. But they're beautiful, all of his cuvées. The Macla, they do the Côte de Jour, which is also Souvlaki, I think, for 3 years. Which is a mix of, I think it's predominantly Chardonnay and a bit of Sauvignon, or vice versa.
80-20, I think.
Yes.
80 Chardonnay, 20 Sauvignon.
It really has it doesn't have the elegance of the Chateau Chelan. Obviously, it's different aging and stuff. But this wine always stands out to me. This is the wine my wife called me at work the next day and was like, "Bring another bottle of this home." It was, but that's why I think this style of wines is so approachable to people that will never try it. I mean, and if there's one, there's so many types of wines that I say people need to try, and it's not specific wines necessarily, but getting wines that taste like this or have these characteristics that are so different from, just your typical, your Californian Chardonnay or whatever style of wine. There's so many people who don't know that they will love this style of wine that have never tried it, and it's so hard to get them in front of people because they're so rare, and there's other kind of forms, but I think it's so crucial for people who have any bit of curiosity in wine or in drinking alcoholic beverages of any type to try to discover and engage with some of these, because as I said, my wife is not a wine professional, is not a wine geek. She has great taste, but there's so many people that I've poured wines like this for. I've poured Ganava, Cuvée Prestige for, that are good friends that say, "Oh my gosh, this is something I've never had before," and they're ecstatic about it. And they're the kind of people, they're drinking Blossom Hill or Martini Prosecco. You don't need to be a geek. You don't need to be reading every book on these regions to appreciate these wines, and hopefully that will help people discover some of them. But I think it's if anybody's listening to this podcast or watching this video that's never tasted some of these wines, I would really implore them to call someone and try it.
But I think it's also because there's something, actually I think there's something familiar about the wine. So sometimes you can present the wine like a crazy skin contact wine to someone, and they can't really find anything in the wine that they're familiar with. And I think there's something in these wines for me, and I don't know if it's because, I've had the pleasure to try so many of them, but I think there's something it's not, it doesn't kind of like make you go, "Oh, I don't understand this." It's more, I think I think there is something that sort of lures you back, and you're kind of like, oh, it's almost like there's something comforting rather than it makes you.
But we've chosen wines, have we not, that we would want to drink, if we could drink a whole bottle of them, yes, that we would drink happily, because there's a pleasure element. I think perhaps Jura, to go back to something Alessio was saying earlier, there was a sense that the wines were oxidative, sort of brown, like cheesy, demanding, nothing more to be admired than to be drunk. And of course now we want to drink the wines. So whether the winemaking has changed or whether we are isolating certain growers who we think are emblematic of the best of Jura and the most exciting styles that we like to drink. But I actually think there are more and more wines being made in this style. I think there's a move away from the sort of like hard oxidative style into something which is much more, I mean, it's still complex, amazingly complex, in fact more complex, because you can taste the terroir, the wine, the vinosity, but it's elegant, and the alcohol levels have dropped, and they're much more serviceable with food. They're much more all-purpose. So it's great we talk about the Comte and the big Jura stew, but we can't always have a bit of Comte in our back pocket, just like bring it out. Well, we could, I suppose.
At the end of the day, I mean, it's going back to the roots, with the Jura, it's always going to be, if people want to understand where Jura comes from, we have to go back to that, kind of style. And I agree with you. Some people will find it appealing, but I think what it's more interesting is that would be for people that are not used to drink this kind of style. It's going to be a great way to push the boundaries in terms of because let's not forget that yes, also in other countries in the world, people are working now, are trying actually not to replicate, but to get some of the ideas from Jura to work with Nonouillet, in Australia, in South Africa, in Italy. And that's a voyage of discovery also to a kind of winemaking style that is not germane to other countries, or even in France outside of Jura. So,
well, thanks everyone. This has been a great evening. Thanks for coming. Thanks for bringing some amazing special wines to share, and And as always, thanks for the great insights. It's been great. I mean, this has really been a special conversation, and I hope people listening will look for some of these wines or explore and discover the wines of Jura like we have. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Jura wine always brings cool people together.
Stop talking about yourself.
But do we really want people to discover these wines? There's so little of them.
You can't buy them.
Why not?
I'll take one down and keep that one.
All allocated.